Hello, friends, and welcome to Worldbuild with Us, the podcast where we create fantastical worlds with help from you, our listeners. My name is Rob Hilferny. I'm here with my co-hosts Daniel Quinn and Courtney Staples. On today's episode, a new listener and a new, oh boy, this prompt is out there. Very excited to get into it today. This new prompt is coming from a new listener or first-time submitter, I suppose, Orlando, with the prompt, a world where different subgenres of steampunk have different sections for them. Tenet number 1, it has to have the same continents as Earth, but you can change the names. It also has to have cities on boats and balloons with airships in the mix as well. I mean, that's kind of in there with like the punk genre, but yeah, I gotcha. It has to have a mixture of solar, steam, and breadpunk. I had to email back and inquire as to what breadpunk is because I had never heard of it, nor could I find any trace of it, and Courtney as well, when Googling. So according to Orlando, this breadpunk is basically a meme genre of the punk subgenre. So we're going with that. And tenet number 3. It has to have elves, dwarves, orcs, goblins, half-orcs, and humans with casual fantasy creatures and cryptids thrown in the mix as well. And there is a PS, which is we also have to have a magic system based around the elements. So with all that, remember that if you want us to build your world, like we're doing with Orlando's here, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com. Click on the link. Follow the instructions, and within a reasonable amount of time, we'll be building your world. If you want to follow us on social media, we're over on Twitter at Let's Worldbuild. If you want to come join our Discord and chat with us about what breadpunk is or is not, by all means, click on the link in the description and come chat with us about that. And of course, if you're feeling particularly generous or you just want access to our sweet, sweet Patreon-only goodies, like double episode length for patrons, you can go to our Patreon and donate us money there. No pressure. You can, but it's fine. And with all that shilling out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we've got a very unique prompt with this one. And Daniel, why don't you get us started today?
Okay. Since there's so many random things happening in this prompt, I had the idea of giving us a vehicle for that. This world, which apparently is a version of our world, sits on top of or maybe it's hidden, I guess, since it is our world, sits on top of a giant mechanical clock face that turns. And as it turns, it shifts the errors of the world through time.
Ooh, I like that a lot, actually. That's super fun.
There you go.
So it's like the same thing, and it's just like a dramatic shift.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, so how does this shift work exactly? Because I'm assuming that the same character is going to experience that shift. Like, I'm walking down the street and I'm dressed in Victorian garb one moment, and then in the next, I'm dressed as like a cowboy or something like that, right?
I have no idea, but I like that.
Okay, great. Because I'm assuming that people just don't die in the middle of this era shift.
Yeah,
and it's like it's the same person but shifted into a different era, right?
That sounds great to me.
Okay, because otherwise it's like I'm walking down the street,
everyone dies,
and it just immediately fucking die, right?
Everyone fucking dies.
Yeah, so like that's kind of that could be technically problematic.
Yeah, it could be troubling. Yeah. So if you travel counterclockwise, can you go back in time?
Hell yes.
We're going to have to get into that. Also, the fact that it's on a big clock face is very steampunk, so I very much appreciate that.
I'm thinking like turtle, like in place of a turtle, the world is actually on the back of a clock face.
Yeah, like a Terry Pratchett style thing. Yeah. Okay. I'm also thinking, right, like what happens if someone gets shot and then the time shifts and it's like now they get like there's an arrow mid-flight and then it like click shifts.
That could so be a cinematic moment. That would be hilarious. Yeah.
Or it's like, oh, I got shot, and then the time shift, and there's just a fucking javelin sticking out of you, or something like that. Like these are the things that I'm thinking. Like, okay, there's a lot. There's a lot that we can consider here. But I really do like that deal.
Like
That's a really great place to start for sure. So, Courtney, why don't you hit us with your first tenet? Now, because we're just rocking through these right now. I appreciate it. So, Courtney, hit us with yours. What you got?
So to explain my thinking here.
Lord. Okay.
We've got steampunk, which often has like Victorian and pre-Victorian vibes to it. And we've got breadpunk, which I still don't know if it's like a legit thing, but I'll accept it. So bread equals baking. And you smash those two together, and we've got a slice of life story following Jane Austen style characters who are trying to master their baked goods to enjoy at high tea.
That is a hyper specific tenet, and I'm so here for it. Yeah.
That's like, I don't really care about like wars and grand politics in the setting. I just want
hell yes.
I just want like an orcish Elizabeth Bennet like working on a scone recipe.
Okay. That is really fucking good. I love that so much.
Thank you.
Okay, let's kind of break this down a little bit because so all of the like setting and stuff like that. The core of your tenet is that you want it to be slice of life, correct?
Yeah, like a lower key, lower stakes type of thing.
Gotcha. Okay, that I can definitely work with. Especially when we add in like the element system, because I imagine that these bakers are also going to be like, using elemental magic and stuff like that in some way, right?
Yeah, I was thinking that the element or magic could definitely play a big role in baking and like what the outcomes of the food will be and how they'll affect you and stuff like that.
Or sabotaging your opponent's bread or baking and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like, oh, why didn't my bread rise? And then you realize that because your opponent like iced over the chimney that you were like the ventilation that you had. So it like didn't proof or something like that. Yeah, that works remarkably well. So I'm going to get a double header in with my tenets because I feel like one, they work remarkably well together. And two, I think that I have an idea for what I want to do here. So number one, as soon as Orlando mentioned cryptids, I'm like, oh my God, yes, this is exactly what I want to do and focus on. So while elves, dwarves, etc., all exist, the main characters in our setting or the main like focus is going to be on the cryptids. I want to focus on chupacabras, on yetis, big feet, I guess, and like all of the weirdo cryptid stuff. Like those are our main characters. And as a result of that, this kind of double world exists where there exists like the normal world and then there's the cryptid world that is like hidden. And considering that we're making it slice of life, I love the fact that we're doing like Yeti Bake Off, basically, right?
Or this is now the Great Yeti Bake Off.
I think again, go with the alliteration. Great Bigfoot Bake Off.
Yeah.
I think that's what we got to go with. And my second tenet, because I had these ideas in the first place, and this is kind of working out anyway. This is going to be the hardest tenet I think that we've ever come up with, because none of us are funny. And I want our setting to be a comedy focused setting.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I mean, like, I don't want it to be like cringe worthy, but I want there to be like Daniel kind of alluded to earlier, a Terry Pratchett level of like punniness and silliness and like fun like that, where it's like more lighthearted, more fun. And I think that Discworld is like a good kind of like baseline for where we are in this particular thing.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it works with like the stuff that we've got already, like with the cryptid Bake Off and things like that. I think we can amplify that even more.
Oh yeah. I think that where we're going here is working remarkably well so far.
So I want to make sure I have these factors in play so far. So we've got this world moving through time on the clock face. We're focusing on a small slice of life, kind of, you said Jane Austen style.
Yeah. Like that kind of romantic element to it.
But yeah, people that are kind of like they're living their leisure existence.
Right.
But the principal characters are not human, right?
Correct.
But cryptids.
Okay, and yes. So when you say cryptids, you mean like the orcs and the non-humans, basically, right?
No. No, I
No.
mean cryptids as in like folklore monsters. So like specifically it would be stuff like the Jersey Devil. It would be stuff like Bigfoot. It would be a skunk ape, for example.
Mothman.
But these are the principal characters, right?
These are the principal characters. That's exactly right. Yes, Daniel.
Okay. What I was trying to square is because you said like Jane Austen as an orc. So would an orc count as one of them? Or are they separate?
Oh, because that was an example that I gave before of just the vibe of like an orcish Elizabeth Bennet, but it could be like a chupacabra Elizabeth Bennet.
Okay, so we agree that the cryptids are the protagonists, essentially. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, sorry. I just wanted to get that straight.
No, that's a good clarifier.
Yeah,
I even had it in my mind a little bit where like the cryptids are like they even view like the elves, dwarves, orcs, etc. as cryptids in their own world, because it's like, you know, like, oh my god, it's a human with 5 fingers and he's only so tall and he's got pink skin, you know. Like I think having that like weird subversion might be kind of fun, you know. And also like when you can have Bigfoot in like Victorian gowns or like like come on,
enjoying
like,
high tea.
Yeah,
I love it. I actually might as well say my second tenet now because it's also cryptid related.
Hell yes.
I just basically just hadn't wanted them to get lost, which was not a concern, of course, now that I see yours. But I wanted them, rather than being like mysterious creatures that you only see out of the corner of your eyes in the wilderness, like they are themselves small tribes and nation states scattered around. So, for example, like a community of Yetis in the Himalayas who might invite you in for some tasty yak milk or something.
Oh, I think it's called miak, Courtney.
Miak. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yes. I appreciate the
That's
correction.
an Ernest Scared Stupid reference, by the way. I just want to toss that out there.
I know. I remember those movies vaguely as a child.
And I actually do want to to like Daniel's curiosity. I do want to point out like cryptids are more like what we would. It's a weirdo pseudoscience, but it's like things that humans genuinely believe exist in our current world. Right. So, for example, right, like we know that orcs don't exist, so that would not be a cryptid, but there are people who are still out there who are looking for big feet, who are looking for the Loch Ness Monster, who are looking for Mothman, and genuinely believe that these creatures exist in our world. And so I wanted to kind of take that and just completely flip it on its head, where they are the norm compared to like, rather than like some lost mystical or semi-mystical kind of animal or species or something like that. Does that clarify things, Daniel?
Oh yeah, I know what cryptids are. I just wasn't sure whether we had like fantasy races being separate from cryptids and which one were the protagonists. That's what I was trying to understand.
Gotcha. Okay, good. I'm glad that we can kind of sneak that in there. Plus, I want to make sure that we have a more cohesive description of what a cryptid is in general. I think it's helpful.
So, if these settings are moving through time and this is still the regular world, how are we setting this up? Like, so are the cryptids and the other fantasy races, are they part of Earth's history in some way? Are they alternate history? Is it not moving through time, but alternate worlds? Like, how do we want to deal with that?
That is an excellent question, Daniel.
Yeah, I was picturing it as like they've always been a part of this world and like since the beginning, but somehow history has kind of progressed in a vaguely similar way, except we've got like steampunk and solarpunk and all that in the mix. So they've like been there the whole time. I'm not really sure how to deal with the eras of time issue though.
Well, considering that Orlando wanted something that's more akin to like our natural time, I feel like that we could kind of probably pick 3 eras and then shift between those 3. And like, obviously, if we were to flesh this out even further in another episode or like somewhere else, then we'd want to like really drill down and see more eras in history. But I think by focusing on 3 different eras in time, that helps us kind of narrow down our focus in terms of what we're talking about or what we want to talk about. And to kind of Daniel's point earlier, I want to make sure that we understand that this is like an alternate timeline of history, with like all of the fantastical elements that we've added in. So like just because it is the American plains and it's the, you know, Mongolian wastes, it doesn't mean that the history is the same thing. I mean, I think that we should probably model our eras to be close to certain eras within, you know, the Earth's history, but I don't think that we have to necessarily approach this like the cryptids emerged at X time. Like, I think we can say that the cryptids were basically the primary species and primary movers and shakers from, you know, the primordial soup type thing, if that makes sense.
So basically, like there's a mythical past that these things are in, right? And we're moving. So does that mean if we move to other eras, it's not cryptids anymore?
I don't think so. I think that like we're moving along a timeline rather than like between worlds, right?
So then this is an alternate history where cryptids are the predominant species.
Correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. And we're moving through its history across the
correct.
Across the world.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So now I'm situated.
Okay, good. No, I'm good. I'm glad that you clarified because I'm sure that some listeners were a little bit curious about that as well.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay, so Daniel, you have to hit us with your last tenant, don't you? I think you're the only one with one still in the chamber.
So I originally had a different tenant because I didn't accept this vague definition of what breadpunk was, but I tossed it out. I have a different one. My original tenant was I wanted to say that breadpunk does not refer to bread, but refers to bread as in breeding, and we could do something with cloning.
Oh,
but
gross!
Who cares? I like the baking with Jane Austen. I think that's more fun.
Yeah.
So when I heard that, I thought instead there is a central point in this clock face that is exempt from the time shifting or the era shifting. And it is some kind of special city, like a Wizard of Oz sort of thing.
Oh, that's kind of fun.
Is the cuckoo clock?
Sure.
And like the thing pops out every time the era shifts. And, like,
yes, maybe they can see that. Maybe that clock is represented in each era in a different way, but it's actually the clock at the center. Like for example, in an Egyptian period, it might be like I don't know something of the Sphinx popping out, whereas in the Victorian period, it's like a cuckoo clock.
I was thinking like sundial at some point. That would be kind of fun, you know. But yeah, I very much appreciate this for sure. Okay, I think it would do us some good right now if we actually broke down the eras that we want to focus on. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I have a very important question for y'all. Do we want to come up with these eras, or do we want to roll randomly on our world building sheet and then kind of go with a genre based on the random die roll?
I'm all for random rolling in this case.
Daniel, how do you feel about that?
I love random.
Hell yes. Okay. So we've got our random genre generator here. So I'm going to roll some dice, and our time periods will shift based on the genre. So let's see what we roll here first. All right, our first time period is going to be cosmic horror. So when I think cosmic horror, I have to think Call of Cthulhu, and I have to think the 1920s. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense
absolutely.
For everyone?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so now we've got gangster Bigfoot, and I'm like, oh man, I love that so much.
This is about playing to the trope in this case. It's like there's no if it's a Terry Pratchett kind of comedy, you want to lean into cliches and
yes, I agree with that entirely. So this is like so when I say cosmic horror, we're really talking about time period here. In that it's like 1920s, 1930s era, like America. So like I'm talking like big time Chicago gangsters. I'm talking like Prohibition. I'm talking like Eliot Ness. Like that's where my mind goes. Does that square with y'all, or do you have something else in mind?
Prohibition especially sounds really, really fun to do.
Oh, you're baking illegal goods.
Yes. Yeah.
We got
okay. Damn. Okay. Nailed it.
Yeah. You know, like where the whole baking thing. Because I think as this shifts from time, there might be all this crazy stuff happening out there. But what it comes down to in the story is the social relationships at the table the Jane Austen character, because that's what those books are about. So we've got those things to be in the periphery, like the gangsters, the cosmic horror, but it comes down to that recipe, and I think sometimes Prohibition's great because that centers it, you know.
Exactly. I'm so with that. Yes. Okay. Next genre that is going to be a big shift for us is urban fantasy. So, I mean, that's basically what we've got now, but I would consider that slightly more modern. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say it's like more modern, like 2000s-ish.
Sure. So we'll go. Oh, wait, Courtney. Can we do late 90s, early 2000s? So it's like Buffy era.
I was gonna say that. I could say like we could do either Buffy or we could do noir, but Buffy might be really fun, you know.
Yeah,
that works.
Well, no, we'd shift between those two. So we'd shift between like noir and like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. Oh man, this is so good.
Well, if you did Buffy, what's crazy is in that one has forms of cryptids show up in Buffy. So what you do is you have the characters be the cryptids, and I don't know, the elves are probably the enemies or the monsters. You know, like the human-esque things are.
Well, no, we have the humans is one of those races that Orlando mentioned. So we'd have like, oh no, look out, it's a human, you know.
It's what I mean, like they would be the monsters for this Buffy
exactly.
Like,
vampires,
you know. I can see elves being the vampires because elves are pretty like you know, snooty.
What would humans be?
The lesser demon things. Like aren't they like there's like orc-esque things in Buffy. They're not quite vampires.
Wouldn't
like,
that just be orcs then?
You could be orcs. Yeah, they could just be straight up orcs.
You just said orc-esque. It's like we have orcs
barbarian.
too,
maybe they're like barbarians, you know?
Okay. All right. So like late 90s, early 2000s, like that's where we're going for our like urban fantasy. And then finally, for that final shift in time, we have sword and sorcery. Okay.
Ooh, nice.
Okay, wow. This those are all some really interesting ones. So for me, sword and sorcery, that is probably going to be where most of our like really kooky like steampunk, breadpunk, solarpunk stuff kind of comes from, right? Like where it's like I see that as like way more dark and magical than the other stuff. But I think that there is like ironically a theme of darkness in the three kind of like eras that we're going with here, right? Where it's like we're just seeing like something that's a little bit grittier, but I love the fact that we're also focusing on like a bake shop and like breadpunk. Like that's so much more fun to me.
I can see sort of the sword and sorcery being more of a Conan the Barbarian. Maybe it's set in a prehistoric period. Between the two city settings, though, what's going to distinguish them? Like I imagine in the Victorian one, or not the Victorian, the 1930s. The Prohibition one is probably the closest to our concept as far as Jane Austen's concerned. But the 2000s one, you know, like Buffy takes place mostly in the library or where she trains, right? So is like, what are the micro settings for these? Because one I can see being possibly the Prohibition bake shop, right? Another one, what is the second one? What is the prehistoric one?
So I think that's where we kind of come in and we give a little bit of, we break it down a little bit harder, because I think the Prohibition one is like so like easy to like just nail out. Like you're making illicit baked goods, you know, like for whatever reason, these particular baked goods are illegal, and it's all about running like a speakeasy, but for muffins, like that kind of thing. Right. So I think that concept is pretty well built out. And I think that the fun for us is like, how do we take the baking kind of like slice of life stuff and apply it to these settings and make it interesting?
What if we made just like one central location that like we follow through these eras? So maybe it's an area that's like eventually gets built into a university, and like underneath it, there are these like Prohibition era kitchens where they're manufacturing these illicit baked goods, and that's also where the like research library element can take place in the Buffy era.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that'll work. You follow the little setting across time.
Yeah,
but so it evolves over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly right. And then we shift back and forth between eras as well, and that can be like kind of like a fun way to see how that story is playing out between the three eras, you know.
And it could also be like a floating city since
oh yeah, we do need to add those in. You're absolutely right.
Cities on balloons and boats and stuff.
Okay. Yes. Courtney, I completely agree with you on that one. Would we rather this a city on a balloon or a city on a boat? Let me ask you that. I think I prefer boat because I'm imagining like watching that boat shift in time, and like it's a big paddle wheel boat in the 1920s.
Oh yeah.
And then it's like a modern cruise ship in like the 90s and stuff like that. And then it's just a galleon in, you know, like our sword and sorcery type thing. Like I think that watching that boat city shift would be kind of fun to watch as well.
Yeah, I like that a lot. What's that like fable? Was it the ship of Theseus or something? Like,
oh yeah, where it's like, when does it stop being you know, Theseus' ship?
The same boat if you just keep rebuilding it and changing parts.
Yeah. I gotcha. Although I think that with this, there's like a much stronger through line. You know? So we have a city on a boat, and it is a city of bread, right? Because it's or do we even want to do bread? Do we want to do some kind of other baked good? Do we want to have a baked good for each era? Like there's so many places where we can start. Daniel, you need to rein us in here for the first time. Like, where do we need to go next? Please elucidate, sir.
I think we have to ask ourselves who are maybe this is part of moving into the quest line, but we have to ask ourselves who are the principal characters and what do they care about? Because I think I do think the idea of one recipe, one baked good that's really important to a character will be interesting over the ages because you can follow their genealogy, right? Maybe it's, I mean, but you also don't, it depends on how we want to take it. Like we don't have to follow them literally through history. I like the idea of the setting changing. It could also be the spirit of the thing in each history, right? So like, for example, if you're looking at sword and sorcery, maybe, you know, it's in an old sorceress empire or it's in a cave or something. And it's not literally the granddaughter or the great descendant of the next setting. It's just like the same idea, but in that period. So you know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to literally connect through history if we want to just explore the same concept in each spot. Oh,
that's kind of the approach that I was taking to begin with.
Yeah, I think that's easier because then we don't have to worry about the literal connection between the three of them. So it's kind of like it makes me think of what was the movie with Tom Hanks? It's based on Cloud Atlas. Cloud Atlas?
Right. Yeah.
I tried to read the book. I hated it, but the movie I actually liked, and it explores the same concept across time almost, and not time, but across these different periods. I guess it is time, but they're not like literally connected. Sort of. That's the kind of vibe I'm feeling from this.
Yeah. So I think that what we're really doing here is we're giving Orlando 3 settings for the price of 1, right? But we want to make sure that we're maintaining our focus on slice of life bakeries, you know, because I think what's interesting is that like none of us knew what like breadpunk was, but it's also like we're so intrigued by it where it's like, yeah, that's going to be like the focus of what we're going to be doing here, right?
Yeah. I mean, how could you not with a name like breadpunk just make up some weird stuff around it?
Of course, right. So I'm thinking that what we do is we make, because breadpunk is such an integral part of this, that we make the breadpunk central to the core of the idea of what we're doing, right? Like we're following like bakers between these 3 eras, and they're all in. I think what we do is we unify them in terms of want, and then the conflict kind of plays out differently between those eras, right? I think that if we had it so each 3 eras all wanted the same thing, then we can watch that trope and that kind of through line and setting play out with each one. And you could jump back and forth pretty easily because you're following. Actually, I'm just learning about this in my fairy tales course, which is the difference between form and content. So we're following the same form, right? But just watching it through different content and through different lenses of eras and stuff like that.
I like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
That's like as a framework.
Yeah. I think the framework allows it to happen. And I think that the slice of life thing works really well. So I think what we should probably do is at least come up with like a beginning, middle, and end or I think we need some level of structure before we can kind of continue on with our setting a little bit, you know?
Well, so what this recipe, this bread recipe, Courtney, in the interest of keeping the scope small, I imagine it's cared about possibly because it has to do with this person's family. Maybe it doesn't have any kind of magical significance. It's just a very important, like, passed down recipe, right? If we could start there, then you have to raise the stakes.
Oh, maybe it's like a sourdough, because
like
you kind of like take from the same starter for that, right? So it's like passed down over time.
Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so this is like, this baker is the last baker to not use magic while making their bread. And so in the Prohibition era, that is now illegal for some reason. You know, it's seen as like implicitly dangerous, or there's something that's wrong with it. You know, like, what do you mean you don't use bread? You know, so like, that's why it's prohibited. That's why it's illegal, right? This bread is like outlawed and banned. But the thing is that this bread, despite being non-magical, is still probably some of the best bread that's out there, right? And then I don't know why, but I've had the movie Chocolat in my head as we're considering this.
Oh, nice.
And it's like, for those of you who don't know, Chocolat is like this romance movie where this chocolatier comes to this French village, and then, like, through selling chocolates to them, like, changes the lives of everyone in the village. So I'm imagining that we can have like a bread version of that,
That's great,
but with, you know, like something like that where we follow the baker, but we also get like hints of romance and, you know, class struggle and stuff like that through following them out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay. Daniel, how do you feel about that?
Oh, I think that works. I have questions about, because we have to bring in his whole magic stuff, right? Like the elements.
Oh yeah.
I wonder if perhaps either the process of creating the starter or the magic is connected, and I wonder if that goes back all the way to ancient history or something. Like, I don't know, like, how does, I guess, it would take a step back, like, how does magic factor into this, like, in this setting?
That's actually a good opportunity, too, to bring up our good friend C.R. Rowanson Clark. We had asked him for some tips about dealing with magic in this setting, and he had a cool idea about the elemental magic focusing on pollution. So, like, controlling contaminated water, poisoned air, light polluted darkness, and so on.
Right. And considering that steampunk is like a through line through all of this, that totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That you would be able to do that.
So yeah, I'm curious how we could tie that in to this baking process.
I think what I want to do is completely rescind my previous thought about it being non-magical bread. I think I want to reverse it to where they're using magic where everyone else doesn't in baking.
Make it. Yeah, I think in making it, like, the starter is magical.
Right. So you're infusing magic, you're getting that elemental magic in there. And also, like, there's now like anti-magic sentiment. Like, I think that's a far more interesting thought than having it be non-magical. You know, like, if this was a world that was very well lived in and like we knew all about magic, then yeah, maybe a non-magic would make sense. But for our implicit purposes here, I think that starting magical is more interesting than starting not magical. Does that make sense to y'all?
Is magic something passed down to this particular person that they used in their starter, and maybe it's outlawed during this period because it has other applications? Like, I'm trying to think, like, you know, I know this isn't like about the Nazis, but say you have like, you know, say you have like a group of people who have like a special talent, right? And they're being persecuted, you know, and maybe this person's a member of that group because of their powers. Like, it's not gonna be fun for a Terry Pratchett-esque comedy, but I'm just trying to think, like, how is the protagonist a member of a class that has, you know, the ability to make this bread, but that's a problem. You know, is this magic widely used, or is it like restricted to a family, or how does it work? Like, where does it come from?
I think that's kind of a fun way to look at it, right? Because if our main family are big feet, and like there is a common kind of like trope or connection between Bigfoot cryptids and the land. So they're using like natural magic to like hide themselves, or, like what have you. Like that's something that's fairly common when we're talking about these types of cryptids. So I think it would make sense that there's a family of big feet out there who are basically bred shaman, right? Where they're able to, like take the pollutants in the world and like actually purify them to like the most delicious ingredients. And maybe like their lineage is like a rare one and they're the only ones who can distill it. And so that's why they get okay. I keep going back to the Prohibition era because that's definitely my favorite. I'm thinking that like you could either have them sell illicit products or they're being pressured by the mob to sell like this hyper distilled version of like booze. And like, or you could have like a combination where it's like, there's just so much fun stuff that we can do with this. It's ridiculous.
I mean, I like when you said that they have an ability to remove pollutants, right? So their power is like inherently good for the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's being used to make the bread in the end.
Yes. Yes.
Or maybe eating the bread does something to like purify you of pollutants or something like that.
Oh, that's kind of interesting.
Like it's a healing bread.
I like all
That's
of this,
fun.
but I wonder if we're expanding too far out. Maybe like the world's problems are not our problems necessarily. So we know this about the bread, which is good. But how does it concern this particular line of big feet?
The magic?
The whole situation. Like,
okay, was
this recipe lost? Like, let's start with 1930s because that's in the middle, right?
Right.
Yes. So like, what is the problem? What is the problem for these people, for this Jane Austen situation? Usually the Jane Austen situation is like romantic and aspirational, right?
Yes.
So what's the issue here for them right now?
Okay. Here's the deal. The baker is in love with one of the people in the mob.
There we go.
And the people in the mob are trying to pressure the bakers to like either smuggle goods or like make illicit goods, right? But the bakers just want to make bread. So like they're caught in between. And then there's the love angle where it's like, I want to fall in love with you, but you're part of this mob who's putting a squeeze on my family. You know, and like that's where the conflict can kind of come in.
I like that.
And the baker instills their love to this person in their baked goods as gifts. Like that's how they communicate or something.
He or she makes it, right? They make it just for that person, even though they're not supposed to.
So how do we bring in the pollution though? Like that's kind of where, you know, like I'm thinking where we want to focus on a little bit.
Yeah.
Like maybe it's the pollution that they're using is from like the gin mills that the mob is using or something like that.
Like the runoff or something.
Yeah. Oh, that's good. Yeah.
I feel like Courtney is the pollution expert here, given that, and I don't think she's mentioned this on their podcast. Her thesis had to do with climate change, and she has this amazing video she made that shows how that has happened. So I would like to hear what you have to say on this.
Well, basically pollution is bad and we shouldn't do it. No. But no, I think there's like, I feel like there would be something that has built up over time in this area that's like leading to this current pollution issue. Like something that maybe started back in the sword and sorcery era that they didn't realize was going to be an issue, but it's like kind of come to a head. And now something in this bread magic is going to help fix it or purify it.
Okay, so I'm thinking that our sword and sorcery era causes the problem. We see it play out in our Prohibition era, and then we solve it in our Buffy the Vampire Slayer era.
Yeah.
Can it be as simple as a Lord of the Rings as naive perspective on industry? I say that with some scorn, but like, you know, industry really begins in the sword and sorcery period, but through the use of this magic to create civilization, right? And the bread has always been there, and it is a way of A, creating community, B, expressing your love, and C, like purifying things. But the use of magic to create industry is just far greater and machine-like. And over time, it evolves into the 1930s, and then it becomes the Buffy era. And it's a return to magic in the Buffy era that helps us solve the problem.
I like that a lot.
Okay. So the beginning of the reawakening of magic happens in the Prohibition era with this like pollutant purification bread and like that kind of thing. And then the magic is at its strongest in the Buffy the Vampire Slayer era.
Yeah, and you have the paired lovers in every setting. So in Buffy, just like you have Buffy and the vampire, you have the Jane Austen character or whatever he or she is there, and the monsters, or I guess the elves, right? the monsters, they're paired there. In the 1930s, they're paired as the mobster and the baker, and then in something in the sorcery one, maybe like the cleric and like the barbarian warlord. I don't know, whatever.
Right. Okay. Let's make some trouble then. Like, let's go back to Daniel. I want to point out, I love what you said, like this naive view of industry, right? I think that is absolutely a great like theme that gets brought up in steampunk, and like that kind of like
like a utopian view of things. Or
dystopian in some cases, right?
Yeah, depending on the story.
Yeah, very much so. So I think this idea that like, there's so much I want to talk about here. Yeah. Okay, so in the sword and sorcery setting, this is the rise of industry, right? Let's kind of approach it that way, where maybe we're making bread golems that are like start this industrial revolution, right? So you see the beginning of the steampunk era, and then you see the consequences of that in, our 1930s genre, where everything's like really falling to shit because of the pollution's getting so out of control. And then in the 90s, there's much more of a balance, right? Because that's the resolution.
Yeah, I feel like maybe it's moving towards solution, right?
Right.
Yeah.
And then actually, that also works with our solarpunk thing, because I think that's one of the tenets as well, right?
Yeah, it was tucked in there.
It's breadpunk, steampunk, and solarpunk. So I think that by separating the eras into more, into each subgenre punk, I think that helps us as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I think too, like there needs to be like a move towards solution in the third story. Like it's not like we've achieved it. It's more like whatever is happening in the Giles library is the means towards solving the pollution problem through the bread.
Right. Specifically through their love story. Yes, exactly.
Through their love story and the baking of it. Like, I don't know what that would look like. Maybe the elves have taken over. Sorry, good.
No, I just had an idea of like maybe each of them has half of the recipe kind of unknowingly, and they come together and are able to like fully make it for the first time in years.
Yeah. Okay. So
are the elves the villains in each one?
What's that?
I could see like an ancient barbarian elf empire, and then elf mobsters, and then elf demons, I guess, in the modern one. Elf corporate suits,
I was going to say it's Wolfram and Hart, Daniel.
Yeah, Wolfram and Hart.
Yes.
Yes, demon elf
suits. Okay. Sorry. Let's. Do they have to be elves, and can they be Mothmen instead?
I don't care. I think elves are funny because we know we have an expectation of elves, right? And so we're inverting that. Like elf barbarians isn't something you see very often. Yeah. I mean, maybe they have a collection of other. Their companions have to be boring, right? In the sense of like not being cryptids, don't they?
Right. So what you're suggesting is that by making the villains human, that it's actually funnier because it's like the tiny human is like trying to muscle in on like the Bigfoot,
the
right?
Yetis, and they're falling in love with the Bigfoot, like, which is just absurd.
That makes sense. Okay. Here's what we got. In the Buffy the Vampire Slayer thing, I love Courtney's idea that the two halves of the recipe come together, right? In the previous two eras is where those halves of the recipes were written. Does that make sense? So like we see that this recipe has been torn asunder, and then they're recovered in the first two eras, I mean.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could be like the origin was back in the sword and sorcery time, and then it like got fully corrupted or changed in the Prohibition era when the mob was like trying to sort of bastardize the baked goods for their own purposes. And then in like more modern times is when the two halves come back together fully.
Okay.
I like that. Yeah.
I like that as well. I feel like we've like, holy shit, we've given you like so much with this setting already. Like there's
a lot
so
going
much
on. Yeah.
Oh,
I'm like
my
having trouble
goodness, yeah.
organizing my thoughts because it's like one thought starts and then another thought like pops up way over here. And
yeah, actually though, like actually.
Yeah.
But I do appreciate, so like, yeah, there's a lot of really fun and interesting stuff. I feel like we could definitely go back and work with that pollution magic a little bit more, but we simply do not have time. Like we really don't. So I think what would probably be best, because this is a non-patron episode, is when we roll our twist now and try and reconcile with the twist. Does that work for everyone else?
Let's do it. Yeah.
Great. All right. So the twist that we're going to be rolling with this time is, that works because according to this, there is no twist.
Oh, all right then.
I think that actually works out considering how complex our setting currently is. That like if we were to add in like zombies or like it's a trap or like whatever other like it could have just gotten out of control. Okay. Yeah. And I feel like we're teetering on the edge of it as is.
Did we address each of our tenants?
Yes. Great point, Daniel. Let's go back. Daniel, you started us. So where your shift between eras, I feel like that's kind of instrumental.
That's the basis of it. Yeah.
Yep. Courtney, what was your first tenet? Was the you wanted it to be
the kind of Jane Austen slice of life bakery vibes.
Yes, and I feel like again we've stuck to that. I love the slice of life bit. My tenets I did back to back. I wanted to make the cryptids the focus, and I wanted this to be a comedy. I think that we're certainly more on the rom-com side of comedy, but I'm totally okay with that as well. We just need to add in a little bit more puns and stuff like that.
And that may come in the execution of the setting, like which we're not doing here necessarily.
Yes, True. But again, I mean, if we want to throw in some gingerbread men, some gingerbread golems, something like that, I'm totally fine with that too.
I do like the bread golem idea a lot.
Yeah, I say that, and now I think about it, I'm like, well, also I think that the cryptids being like the primary like focus, it can lead to some inherent comedy, like kind of what Daniel was suggesting with like the humans being the villains and trying to muscle in on the Bigfoot. Like that's like an inherently comedic premise that we can kind of roll with. So yeah, I think that works. So let's go back then. Courtney, your second tenet.
That was that there are cryptids as like tribes, nation states scattered around the globe.
Yeah, we made that. We made sure of that. And Daniel, your final tenet?
There is a central city that exists outside of time in the clock phase.
Okay.
Guess we haven't really done that.
We haven't really done that. Yeah.
No. So I had an idea when you kind of re-mentioned your first tenet, which was like, is part of the solution in the third setting some way of like rewinding time so that they can collect the scraps of the recipe they need?
Oh, I like that.
Oh, because the recipe was lost?
Yeah, like literally turning back the clock. That is the Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
How does that fit into the social dynamics of the narrative? The very limited scope of it.
We're also talking about a share classic where if I could turn back time.
I mean, is it
and their love is literally able to turn back time.
Oh my God. Is it as simple as, it doesn't have to be super adventure-y. It could be like their love turns back time and they're able to like explore the previous location and grab pieces of the recipe.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to leave the bubble of the Jane Austen framework. You know what I mean? Like,
no, I agree. Maybe it comes from like interacting with the couples in the past too.
Yeah.
There is a comic book series called, I believe it's called Sex Criminals.
Oh yeah.
You know what I'm getting at, Courtney. But for those of you who don't know, these two people find out that when they have sex with one another, they stop time. And this, rather than like using their powers for good or evil, they basically just rob banks and like steal a bunch of money and stuff like that. So I'm thinking here that we can have a sexy baking scene where their baking together allows them to travel through time.
It's like that scene from Ghost.
From
but with-
Ghost, exactly,
they're, like,
but with dough.
but with dough.
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
Because then we keep it in the little scope of the story. Which is important.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that if we keep it between like a family lineage, that actually does help because you're able to travel back in time through your ancestors. And you see this love story play out in multiple eras and stuff like that. And then maybe the first two don't work out for various reasons, but like in the third one, they finally get together. You finally get that cathartic release, both literally and metaphorically. I think that works, you know?
Yeah. But
I think that's fine.
how can we tie in the city at the center?
Oh, yeah, we didn't do anything with that.
Maybe their love is what allows them access to that city. Maybe it's like when they are baking together, they like close their eyes and they open their eyes and it's like they're in Oz basically, or they're in that city and then they have access to the past.
Yeah,
and maybe
I like that a lot.
Yeah, maybe it's like they don't have to necessarily literally go to a central city, but when that happens, like it is accessible in their period. Like the cuckoo clock can be found, the temple with the sundial can be accessed, and that's where that occurs. You know.
Yeah,
that works. Yeah, that totally works. Holy shit, we're making it happen, you guys. Oh man. Okay. You know what's funny is that we normally do like a main quest line or something like that, but we've really done that throughout this entire goddamn thing.
We've got that covered pretty solidly.
Right. Okay. I would like, because factions in this world seem very strange to me. So instead of a faction, can we just create a romantic rival instead?
Ooh, yes.
Yeah. And then we can
maybe the romantic rival could be a snooty elf because we want to have more snooty elves in this.
Yeah.
And so like the human lover is like obviously trying to bang the elf most of the time, but then in that third one, they finally fall for the Bigfoot as they should,
as it was meant to be.
Yeah. Yes, obviously. Yeah. Oh boy. So Daniel, you start us off. Who is the romantic rival in our sword and sorcery era?
Oh man, I'm gonna say it's a powerful elf barbarian warlord who wants to impress this Jane Austen character. She or he is having none of it.
I think that Daniel, you bring up an interesting point, like unintentionally, that we don't necessarily have solid genders for our protagonists or our love interests. I would love it if it like switches between eras. I think that'd be really fun.
That would be great.
Yeah.
That's very Cloud Atlas. That's great.
Yeah. I just think that it'd be really fun to watch them, like if it like, you know exactly who they are, you know, despite their genders and stuff like that. And then in the last one, you're just rooting for them to get together and stuff like that. So I think it doesn't matter. Like we can switch and be more specific. Would you rather have an elf barbarian, like warlord lady, or, I mean, that's where my brain goes. Like I definitely want like a more Xena type than I want like a Hercules.
How we could just, I don't care. Either one would be funny.
Okay.
As long as it's an elf.
Okay.
Though if elves are immortal in the setting, what if it's the same elf rival and every single time?
Oh yes,
okay, but that's kind of fucked up though.
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah.
Well, and then they could be, maybe they have a fluid sexuality, so it's like no matter how the person's reincarnated, they're in love with them.
Well, you're talking about the elf being reincarnated?
Well, no, so if the elf is immortal and lives through all these time periods, then they're in love with whoever the new incarnation of the Jane Austen character is.
Oh,
so they must have a fluid sexuality, because we're saying that it could be male or female in the future.
I was even thinking that we could have the elf love interest also be like fluid in their gender presentation as well.
Yeah,
so it's like in like the first time you see the elf, it's like a badass, very masculine looking, you know, kind of elf warlord barbarian. And then in the 30s, they're like a femme fatale style, you know, like more like lithe and like they're like a gangster mall type thing.
Yeah.
That is
maybe in the present day they're like totally gender neutral corporate type, like
they're androgynous, like David Bowie types.
Yes, that's what I was picturing. Exactly that.
Yeah. And I mean, elves are known for androgyny anyway, so it totally works. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Oh man, this is so good. This is so fucking fun. I love this so much. Okay. And Daniel, you're absolutely right. This person has an obsession with the love interest in every single one, and I think that it can kind of come out in like toxic ways in each like era. Like in the barbarian one, it's like very violent. It's like very aggressive. And then in the gangster era, it's like a little bit more manipulative and subtle and stuff like that. But it's still like that core of obsession still exists,
Mm-hmm. Maybe it even has to do with the bread recipe. Like they know that this person has it and they want it from them because they had a taste of it millennia ago or something like that.
They're the bread monger. Is this what you're fucking getting at, Courtney? Oh my God. I'm jealous. I'm jealous of the bread recipe. Like that's their whole motivation.
Yes.
I think they can also have that motivation. Maybe that's what it boils down to, is their love of this person because of their association with the bread. But I think they might also have larger ambitions because think of like the evil noble character, right? Like, because if industry is the source of magic is what drives forward industry, and it also generates the starters, I would think that if their empire fell into the wayside in the sword and sorcery period, and their corporate overlords in the modern day, clearly they've been driving something forward all along. And I'm sure that their fixation, their love affair with this character is connected to their intent to move history forward through industry.
Yeah.
So this is the character that personifies the pollution in the setting, right?
Exactly.
And I love that because it's a toxic person embodying literal toxins in the environment.
Yes. Maybe they're always smoking. Like it's peyote in the past. They smoke a tall, long cigarette as a femme fatale. And the president, it's like a regular cigarette,
Or vape,
Vape. Or vape. Yeah,
they would.
It's definitely vape.
They would vape.
It's a vape.
Okay. So yes, loving all of this. And also they're obviously using that smoke as a type of magic as well, because they're like pulling the pollutants in their lungs and then they're spitting it out as something else, obviously, like that. We got to do something like that. Here's how we're not going to get too much more into detail with this, but here's how if we've created a successful romantic rival, is that you'll have people who are fans of the setting and or story that desperately wanted the romantic interest to get together with that rival, like Team Edward, Team Jacob type shit, no matter how toxic they actually are, someone's going to look at that and be like, they should have been with this person. They should have been with the elf the entire time,
Buffy and Spike, like,
Yep. Compared to Angel. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Oh man. Yep. This is it. We did it. We got there.
That's great.
We made breadpunk a thing, you guys. We did it. Oh, is there anything else that we really need to do at this point? I feel like this setting was remarkably successful.
Yeah, I can't think of. I feel like we covered all the big bases in the prompt and all of our tenets. I guess we didn't get too much into like airships, but I feel like that can just be
that's kind of like an implicit,
given,
kind of, that's where you get the pollution from. You can even have it so like the elf character like comes in or just replace some of the typical vehicles that you think in the era with airships and paddle boats and stuff like that. And I think that works pretty well.
It's window dressing,
Yeah, I like the idea of the elf always being like on some form of airship where it's like a very primitive Zeppelin and the sword and sorcery thing, and then like a very sleek modern corporate thing in the Buffy era.
But still like just spews all this all this like fucking soot and stuff into the air
all the time.
From the front. It's like this beautiful thing, but like if you're in the trail, it's like, oh god, it's just soot everywhere.
It's like a fucking diesel engine.
It's great.
What else do we have to add? I think I'm good here, y'all.
Yeah, I feel like it's rounded. We didn't really talk much about the principal character, but I feel like they're flexible and you can kind of put what you need into them. We know they're Jane Austen.
If it's a romantic lead, it's supposed to be like a blank face anyway, right?
Exactly.
So,
yeah. Well, and there's some self-sufficiency about them. There's some independence about them,
obviously.
like that character.
Yeah.
Wittiness.
All right. Yeah, no, this is great. Orlando, thank you so much for such a unique setting prompt that prompted a very unique response. I'll put it that way. Remember that if you want us to build your world, like we did with Orlando's, you can always go to our website, worldbuildwithus.com, and within a reasonable amount of time, after you follow the link and instructions, we'll build your world. Go on social media at Let's World Build on Twitter, Discord, you know where to find us. And I have to take an extra long time to shill out the Patreon because, again, we love you and thank you for your continued support. If you want to support us, or if you want to double dip on your prompt length, or if you want episodes early, or if you want extra patron exclusive episodes, go to our Patreon with a link in the description of the episode and just donate money. We'll be there for you. That's going to do it for this episode of World Build with Us. Remember that we love you very much, and we're going to get through this together. Until next week.